Wolfpack. Creator Jeff Davis talks Teen Wolf, the movie, and being the werewolf guy. He also talks about how he's approaching his Aeon Flux series. From show creator Jeff Davis, Teen Wolf. The movie picks up 15 years after the events of the original series, as Evil and an unexpected old flame have returned to Beacon Hills. No longer a teenager, alpha werewolf Scott McCall, Tyler Posey, is tested in a way that leads him to reunite with trusted friends and allies, including a wide variety of supernatural beings, to fight against a powerful and deadly enemy that has them all facing their pasts. During this one-on-one interview with Collider, executive producer Davis talked about when he realized he'd become the go-to werewolf guy, what they were able to do with this movie that they weren't able to do with the TV show, the impossible task of weaving the long history of the TV show into a new story, having to edit down a 3-hour cut, whether there was ever a version written that included Styles, and making the decision to have a character sacrifice themselves. He also talked about Wolfpack and what makes the series different from Teen Wolf, and how he's approaching his Aeon Flux series. Collider. When did you realize that you've become the werewolf guy? What was the moment that you decided to embrace that? Jeff Davis. It was a gradual process with Wolfpack. I said, all right, I'll just write the pilot, and then I'll hand it off. But of course, I wrote it and I fell in love with the characters. I said, all right, I guess I'll stay on a little bit longer. And then, when we got Sarah Michelle Gellar, I was in it from there on out. I said, all right, I guess I'm the werewolf guy. That's always how it is in Hollywood. One day, you're the procedural guy, which I was too, and the next day you're the horror, werewolf guy. It's just another way of telling a very human story about the monsters lurking within us, or the fear of a monster inside of us. I love horror for that reason, which is funny because I never liked it before. As a kid, horror movies scared the hell out of me, but then, as I became a teenager, I began to gravitate towards them, probably because they had such a visceral response for me. In what ways would you say that Teen Wolf, the movie, is the show we used to know, and in what ways is it a new thing? Davis. I would say, it's definitely the show you used to know, but it's very much now about adults, as well, because they've all grown up. One of the things we definitely wanted to do was bring in one new teenager. And that's Vince Mattis, who plays Eli Hale, Derek's son. We knew there had to be, in some way, a new Teen Wolf, so we brought him in. It was really interesting to revisit all these characters 15 years later, as adults. As Tyler Posey and Holland Roden will tell you, it's strange to be playing this character as their age. What were you able to do with the movie that you weren't able to do with the TV show? Because they're older and you're telling a more finite story with, and just couldn't before? Davis. One thing I wanted to do, that we did in the movie, was a lacrosse scene in a big stadium. We got our big stadium, and I was able to do that championship game. I also wanted to do really big life or death moments. And I wanted to just keep telling the story. When we did Teen Wolf, we tried to make every episode look like a movie, even on our limited budget. We didn't have a Marvel movie-sized budget for the movie either, so we were still pushing the boundaries of the budget. But one of the things that the movie allowed us to do was to tell a more compressed story. It's fast-paced, even for 2.5 hours. I'm really hoping the audience likes it. How did you decide how much time had passed? What made 15 years feel right, Davis? We decided how much time had passed for 2 reasons. One was that I wanted to have enough distance for Scott's character to be in a midlife crisis. I knew I wanted him to be somewhere in his 30s. I found my inspiration in my own 30s, and there were big changes that happened to me. We also wanted to give enough time for Derek to have a teenage son. I knew I didn't want him to be 8 years old. I wanted him to be around 15 or 16, so that dictated the time as well. How hard is it to tell a story that has multiple seasons of history to it, but that you also know people will be coming to without having seen any of that? Davis: it's not just hard. It's a near impossible task. I remember sitting at the computer, thinking to myself, I have 20 main characters. How the hell am I supposed to do this? The script was 148 pages. When I finished it, it was long. The first cut of the movie was 3 hours. I was trying to give every single character a moment and every single relationship a suitable end, but that's impossible to do. You can't do it unless you're doing a full season of TV. So, a lot of that gets stripped out, and you find yourself honing it into something smaller and more intimate. Really, a movie is about 1 or 2 people. Usually it's about one person who wants something. But in this movie, I had to consider all those characters and all those relationships, and how much I wanted to touch upon them. I know there's gonna be some fan disappointment with, what happened with this character? What happened with that character? But I would say that's for the next movie, Davis. It was. Trying to cut down a 3-hour movie is a particular challenge, especially when you're cutting things that are character moments that you know are important, but don't necessarily need to be there for this story. You just want it anyway. I wanna see that moment with Malia. I wanna see that moment with Jackson. And then, you realize, well, maybe not in this movie. How did you approach writing this and figuring out the story you wanted to tell? Did you find out who would actually be able to return, and then write it? Did you have to make some adjustments? Davis: when a movie gets announced and the actors have not all signed up, it's a lot more complicated. There were questions as to who was gonna be back, all the way up until a very late point in the creative process, so we were left scrambling for a bit and were coming up with new things, constantly. It was tough. I would not do that again. But it also left us a certain challenge of, whose story do we focus on? Whose story is this? I got to think a lot about that, and it always brought me back to the character of Scott McCall, played by Tyler Posey. I said, all right, this is still just a story about a young man. It's about Scott McCall. Everything else revolves around that. I always had that anchor point. Did you have a version written that Styles was in? Did the Jeep end up playing a bigger role because it filled that void? Davis: the Jeep was always gonna be in it. The Jeep is its own character. It's definitely Styles' Jeep, but the Jeep became a character